Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about a project, okay, but every project needs to be managed this way. So this is a project on potential output in the NERU. It's going to cover the experiences of uh, of two countries, two central banks that we think know how to do this stuff. There's many that don't, that are still at the HB filter, kind of Kalman filter says view of FPAS Mark One, or worse yet, no FPAS, and so on. The Bank of Canada has a pretty long history of thinking about potential output. You can go back to a paper in the early 1990s by Bob Tetlow and I called the multivariate filter paper. Okay, and it's not just about the multivariate filter, but it's about the historical narrative about how countries like Canada messed up potential output. Now, if you understand the issues, it's not just potential output; it's how you misunderstood the analytical framework that involved the Phillips curve and the fundamental role of monetary policy and so on. So, I want you, Sylvie and Satanik, to take on this project. And I want you to do three things. I want a draft working paper. I want a presentation to the board, and I want a box. And I want three of those things drafted in 3 days. And I want the final version of it by the end of the week. And if they're up to scratch, we will actually release the working paper as a working paper. If the presentation's up to scratch, we might present it to the board. And of course, a box on potential open the NERU is always something deeply appreciated if it was intelligible. Now, first points are, in the FPAS Mark One kind of world, uh, unfortunately, many central banks were organized this way. You kind of like look for all the inputs. You do the nowcasting. People specialized in that, and then they kind of pass it to the bottle operators. That's not how we think under FPAS Mark II. We might have much higher standards for economists that basically have to think about everything. And when we think about potential output in the NERU, they are dependent on the world that we think that we're living in, like the three essential ingredients. Where is the economy today? What are the underlying forces, and what do we need to do with our instruments to achieve our objectives? There's no unique set of estimates of potential output of their NERU. They're dependent on, for example, if we think that we're in a case A world or a case B world, and so on. The other important thing is that we don't have use naive filters like the HP filter, like never use that thing. Uh, Multivariate filters are okay, but if you look at our paper in the early 1990s, you'll see there's an incredible wide confidence intervals. You can't trust them. And so we want you to think about potential, the NERU, and everything else as being a summary statistic, not something that you're going to go away and develop the perfect model and come back with the perfect answer and so on. So that's important. Second part is, how do you do research? So you're going to focus on Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. The reason that we want to focus on Canada and New Zealand is that they're really good examples of how to do this. In the case of the Fed, they still haven't figured it out. And we want you to go back to some of their teal books and green books to see how they messed up historically by not having a framework for thinking about potential output. So we want you to go back, for example, to the global where they had this kind of view at the Fed, and I would say in many other places, that there was this kind of view about potential output, and you needed to have uh, uh, overwhelming evidence that that view had kind of changed, okay, before you would change it. And as a result of that, that caused them to make big errors during the global financial crisis because they had these extremely optimistic assumptions about potential and did not revise them even after the global financial crisis unfolded and so on. So comparing Canada and comparing the US back then is really helpful. Okay. Now, heat reports. What is a heat report? A heat report is to demonstrate that if you're a best of the best economist, that you understand what is going on. You're not just going and taking a bunch of crazy models and so on, but you actually understand what is going on in those economies. So that's what the H stands for, the historical narrative. E means economics, that you're using the appropriate type of economics for the questions that you're dealing with. A is accountability. That's all about writing your heat report every 45 minutes and demonstrating that you know how to do research in a systematic manner and so on. So one of the issues last week, for example, is that people would pass information about the historical things that were in Bank of Canada monetary policy reports. There were no dates on them. And so when I'm looking at that stuff, it was impossible for me to go through it because it just people passing on information without organizing it and so on. So when you do your heat reports, you should think about it as if you were to get sick and you weren't to carry on with the project, and it's a very important project, then how could somebody take over that project from you? Okay, so I want you to think about, when you do a heat report, you do it that way. And T, of course, are you using technology? Okay, and in this case, you're drafting these three notes, so you're going to be using, ChatGPT to basically help you formulate things like the correct grammar and things like that. And so that's why you're going to be able to do something like this in 3 days, whereas you wouldn't be able to do this kind of thing 10, 15 years ago because you didn't have ChatGPT. Now you have the opportunity of writing a working paper, a box, and a presentation all in one go. And that forces you to think that there are different types of audiences and so on. So today, what we want is the 2-5 heat reports. That means 2-minute summary about what does the governor need to know. Okay, you run into him in the morning, and he says, "I've got a very important meeting this afternoon with the IMF where we're going to be talking about potential output in the NERU and so on, conceptually about how to think about measuring it and using it to communicate monetary policy and so on. Tell me what I only have 2 minutes, but give me a 2-minute briefing now." So you have to, you have to get used to doing that, thinking about honing in on that audience and not just describing what you're doing, but describing why it is you're doing. And then, of course, you're walking up to your office, and then the head of the macro directorate runs in and says, the governor just called him, and he liked what you said, and now he wants me, the head of the macro directorate, to go and give him a briefing. Now you have to give me a 5-minute briefing about what I can then pass on to the governor. Okay, so that's getting you into the mindset of why you're doing what you're doing, and that you have to communicate, completely differently depending on the environment that you're in. Okay, is it clear? Okay, good. So if we could just stop that. Okay, now.